week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking from Washington, D.C. It's Friday, the 28th of June, 2013, and we are living now through these glorious anniversaries, the victories at Gettysburg and Vicksburg on the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, and 4th of July, which represent the turning point in the attempt by the slave power conspiracy to destroy the United States and to prepare a large slave empire in the Caribbean and South America. And that would have been a slave empire of primitive accumulation, which could have consumed the entire world like a immense black hole, allied, of course, with the British Empire at that point. We hope to get back to that in one of our later segments. But now let's look out here at the panorama. Unfortunately, on the domestic front, the reactionary or fascistoid rats cabal, Roberts, Alito, Thomas, Scalia, allied with the unprincipled Kennedy, have attempted to strike down and have struck down the most important enforcement provision of the Voting Rights Act. This goes far beyond race relations, although it's enough of a disaster in that area alone. It is the preparation of a permanent austerity dictatorship. It is a way to attack the only guarantees of voting rights that we have, that the federal government can enforce on the various recalcitrant and wayward reactionary states, the neo-Confederate states, but also the states like Wisconsin or Michigan or Pennsylvania and others, where reactionary state legislatures and reactionary governors are attempting to limit the franchise, right? So this hypothesis that we had last year of the danger of a permanent austerity dictatorship has taken a giant step towards realization. If you can control the right to vote, and if you've got fascist judges dominating the federal judiciary, as you now seem to, then the path to a dictatorship becomes more and more clearly visible. But let's focus, first of all, on the immediate question of war and peace, and this obviously involves Syria. We are still demanding the impeachment of John Forbes Kerry. We want John Forbes Kerry, member of the infamous Skull and Bones Society, impeached, ousted, and the complaint against Kerry is an attempted coup d'etat, an attempted end run, an attempted cold coup or palace coup in the Principals Committee on the afternoon, I believe now, of Wednesday, the 12th of June, 1 week after the fall of Qusair, the principal fortress of the Syrian death squads. Kerry, urged on by Foreign Secretary Haig of the British, attempted to use a meeting of the Principals Committee to initiate the bombing. Make no mistake, this was not to recommend something to Obama. This was an attempt to launch the bombing. It is in the infamous tradition of Henry Kissinger's October 1973 declaration of a worldwide nuclear alert, while Nixon slept, was not even consulted. And even more egregious, Al Gore in March of 1999 ordering the bombing of Serbia to prevent Yevgeny Primakov from crossing the Atlantic with a peace deal, which would have obviated this immense, dastardly historical vandalism, which was the bombing of Serbia in the spring of 1999, right? Basically 100 days of wanton destruction in Europe, the first time that NATO had been an aggressor. So that's the tradition. That's what Kerry was aiming at. And, of course, our dear friends, the left liberals, and our other friends, the libertarians, all of them obsessed with their perfectly insignificant little emails and their insignificant little phone calls and their little privacy, which in the world's historical scales adds up to very little, and not concerned with the immense issues that can lead to hundreds of thousands, millions of deaths, a regional war in the Middle East, and indeed a third world war. And all of that made much easier, facilitated by the Ed Snowden CIA limited hangout psychological warfare operation. So let's look now at the Syrian situation. The hysteria and stridency of the rebels has escalated. We had, within the last 7 to 10 days, a perfectly hysterical interview by General Idris, where he went nuts. He had a bonkers ape act on the Al Jazeera channel, where he said that Putin, of course, is a terrorist and a liar, and that they're not going to Geneva, right? The death squads are not going to negotiate. The death squads demand all kinds of preconditions. The death squads want Hezbollah out. They want all kinds of weapons. They have a wish list of weapons we'll get to in a second. And otherwise, they're not going to Geneva. What an embarrassment for Skull and Bones Kerry, who supposedly is supporting a Geneva conference. This is simply a cover story for Kerry as he prepares new attempts to start bombing Syria. Anyway, here we have in the Washington Post of yesterday, Thursday, June 27th, we can't afford any more delays. Syrian rebels say they need promised arms soon to avoid rout. Yes, rout. When the retreat turns into a rout, that is the point we have now reached with these death squads. The process that began at Qusair, in particular, on the 5th of June with the liberation of that city from death squad rule. This is now going on, and those same rebels are now being forced further and further up into northern Syria. We quote here Taylor, Luck, and William Booth of the Washington Post. Commanders of rebel units operating in southern Syria say if the promised arms do not begin flowing in the next few weeks, their fighters are in danger of being routed by forces loyal to Assad, who are being assisted by Shiite Lebanese militia, Hezbollah, and unknown numbers of Iranian fighters, and Iraqis, I would add, too. So the story here is that the rebels, the so-called Free Syrian Army, always in quotes, every one of them free and Syrian and army, and then the whole thing in quotes. These battalions of this gang have been driven out of the village of Itla, I-T-L-A-A-A, in southern Syria. Also, Basr as-Sham, B-A-S-R-A-S-S-H-A-M. These two villages have been taken. These are key strategic villages taken by Assad forces with the help of Hezbollah. So the hysteria is growing here. One of them even says, we need it in a week. It's got to be all delivered in a week or we will be goners. Well, I guess that's the way it goes. Here's the wish list of the rebels. They want the following kinds of missiles. Now, these are variously anti-aircraft and armor-piercing anti-tank missiles. Stingers, of course, the Stingers are the classic man-pads. Those are anti-aircraft missiles. Milan, that's an anti-tank missile. Back, 20 years ago in NATO, they'd say, Milan und Hot sorgen für den Panzerschrott. If you want to wreck some tanks and junk some tanks, then you need Milan missiles and hot missiles. In this case, they seem to want Milan. And then there's Dragon and Gustav. So Stinger, Milan, Dragon, Gustav, all of those demanded by the death squad. But watch out when they turn those against civilian airliners of the United States, Europe, Israel, or who knows who else. That's impeachment bait for Obama. Back in a minute.
Hi.
Welcome back to World Crisis Friday, the 28th of June, 2013, approaching the end of the first half, the second quarter of the year with these Gettysburg, Vicksburg anniversaries. Great chance to visit these places. If you've never done it, certainly it's really imperative, and you've got a broad geographical opportunity there, because there are these two places that are involved in the commemoration, and they're widely separated. The death squads are screaming that they face short-term collapse. Good. We're happy to hear it, and we mean to do everything possible in terms of acting on U.S. public opinion to see that these terrorists are not filched from the jaws of defeat by some kind of U.S. military adventure. We have an interesting quote here in the Washington Post of yesterday. Abu Abdullah al-Said, former Brigadier General of the Syrian Air Force, a renegade, a turncoat, right, bribed to go over to the death squads. He's from the town of Duma near Damascus. He says, our forces are not just demoralized. There is something new. There is a fear, the heady hysteria, the heady baseless gloating and security, that confidence that they were going to have a cakewalk. Well, no cakewalk. And now the morale of the death squads is wavering. So you get the idea. Now, this is the tendency. Now, the agitation, of course, of the British and the French, along with the Israelis, along with the U.S. neocons, and with their point man, John Forbes Kerry of Skull and Bones, is an attempt to save the death squads. Now, a couple of other things going on in the meantime. We have in the Washington Post a report that Russia, the Russian Federation, has removed all military personnel from Tartus. This is a rather basic naval facility that is there. The Russia says that they continue to maintain 16 ships in the Russian Mediterranean Squadron in the Eastern Mediterranean, but the role of Tartus has been de-emphasized. We have neither servicemen nor civilians in Syria anymore. Well, then who knows what the actual status on this is. But we're also told now that Russia is acquiring other options in the form of bases on the island of Cyprus. And these bases in Cyprus include the use of an airfield, the Papandreou Airfield, I think it's called. And we've also got the Russians using a port. The base is the Papandreou Air Force Base in Paphos and the Limassol Naval Base. And the president of Greek Cyprus, I guess it is, Anastasiades, is going to make a visit to Moscow. Right? We're getting back to the days of two superpowers. This is and it's a good development. There's something we've needed for a long time. Right? The unipolar world was not successful. Let's try something a little bit more nuanced, and I think we're all going to fare better. In the Financial Times, as I'm told by the NPR Weekly Review, the economics minister of the Assad government, Secretary Jamil, says that Syria is now receiving a regular and scheduled and reliable ration of support from outside countries, from Iran, from Russia, and China. They are helping Syria with about $500 million U.S. dollars, $1.5 billion per month in cash, in oil, in weapons, and other deliveries, right? And, of course, whenever we mention these things, we want to ask the colleagues over at the Boiling Toads whatever happened to their prediction that after April 15th there would be a backdoor deal between Obama and Putin to dump Syria. Still doesn't look like that's materializing. So there we have it. Brahimi, the UN negotiator, says the prospects for a Geneva conference are dim indeed. Fine, so be it. In Turkey, as we said, I think last week, Turkey is now attempting to outdo Obama in leading from behind, right? Turkey is essentially running in the other direction. You can't rely on Turkey to launch new aggression against Syria because Erdogan has had the daylight scared out of him by these large protest marches. In Jordan, we've got the king screaming that he needs help. He wants Patriots. He wants F-16s. He wants troops from the U.S. Hamas has split into two factions. Haniyeh and the turncoats and the renegades are essentially supporting the death squads, but the military side of Hamas, who know where the bread is buttered, they are concerned with support from Iran and others, and they are not enthusiastic about supporting the death squads. And we've had this change of the emir of Qatar, and whatever that is, it's got to have something to do with the fall of Qusair. Some would say the U.S. has imposed it. That's possible, but to me it looks like the old emir had gotten way out on a limb supporting these death squads, and it looks like this might be an attempt to pull back in the greater interest of the ruling family. So all this going on. Now, the big thing missing, of course, here in the United States is we need protests. So it is in that spirit the United Front Against Austerity cordially endorses the demonstrations called by the Answer Coalition, ANSWER. The Answer Coalition has performed an important public service by coming up with these demonstrations. Naturally, the United Front Against Austerity supports the demonstrations based on a much more detailed and advanced program than the relatively bare-bones program advanced by the Answer Coalition. But, as we say, march separately, strike together. And with that, the UFAA will be turning out for these demonstrations, one in particular in Chicago, I believe, on the 29th of June, as you're hearing this. If you're in Chicago, you may get a chance to run over and take a look. So there's our Middle East situation in a nutshell. If things go on like this, the death squad defeat will become concrete with the fall of Aleppo, the liberation of Aleppo, sometime in July to August at most, right? It's going slowly, but that's the tendency. And at that point, this entire rebellion will be in the dustbin of history. Back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Webster Tarpley here in Washington, D.C. It's the 28th of June. Now, the actions by Skull and Bones Kerry, by which he has made himself the top candidate for impeachment, although the competition among the reactionaries at the Supreme Court, Scalia in particular, is also asking for impeachment. In the case of Kerry, his attempted coup d'etat of the afternoon of June 12th to start the bombing of Syria. That's the overt act and the attempted end run or palace coup. So this is occurring, however, under the cover provided by the Ed Snowden psychological warfare operation, the limited hangout operation. And there is now a growing awareness of this extremely important fact, right? We have, among the left liberals, of course, this positive desire to be duped. It's a hunger for the emotional satisfaction of being duped. And then on the libertarian side, right, among the Austrians, we find something similar. It's equally pathological. But here we have the An absolutely unprincipled opportunist, little Rand Paul, the nepotist. He has come out expressing sympathy for Snowden, and this now means that the libertarian apparatchiki, who are not libertarian at all, they are now committed to defending little Rand's interest in keeping Snowden above the fray and immune to criticism. You get the idea. So this is a dirty, rotten, immoral situation. So let's remember, in going back to just take a look at the Wikipedia, not WikiLeaks, but Wikipedia article on Snowden. In May 2004, Snowden enlisted in the United States Army as a Special Forces recruit, but he did not complete the training. He said he wanted to fight in the Iraq War because, quote, he felt like he had an obligation as a human being to help free people from oppression. However, he said he was discharged 4 months later on September 28th, 2004, having broken both of his legs in a training accident. And then he goes on to the National Security Agency and then the CIA and so forth, right? And he gets everywhere because he claims he's a computer wizard. That would explain his $120,000 to $200,000 a year salary. Well, let's take a look. Even the Washington Post here is interested in some of the aspects of Mr. Snowden's past. Just remember, this is somebody who wanted to go to Iraq and kill people in the name of freedom, okay? And don't ever let go of that important fact. You do that, and unfortunately, that stays with you. It's not so easy to throw that off like a cloak on the Damascus Road if you think you can get to the Damascus Road and just forget about everything you've done. It doesn't work that way. So what do we find? There's a website called Ars Technica. I should say that I'm quoting here from the Washington Post of Thursday, June 27th. In 2009, Snowden denounced leakers. Such people should be shot. Snowden wanted to execute bloggers, leakers. Leakers had to be executed, not published, not honored. He wanted them executed. And wait till you hear how. He goes under the name of the True Hoo-Ha, of singular coinage. But the True Hoo-Ha is indignant on Ars Technica, saying, oh, people, the New York Times, are reporting classified blank, expletive. You don't put that blank in the newspaper, so he's concerned about maintaining secrets. At this point, he was 25 years old and stationed in Geneva, Switzerland, working for the CIA. Are they trying to start a war? He says of the New York Times. Jesus Christ, they're like WikiLeaks. So WikiLeaks is a term of opprobrium. Now, of course, that has changed this week as the making of strange bedfellows has put him in bed with his actual rival, Assange. But there they are. What else do we learn about the great, the true hoo-ha, that is to say, our dear friend Snowden? He hates the metric system. Okay, he thinks John McCain is an excellent leader and a guy with real values. He thinks Obama is what we need. We need an idealist first and foremost. He doesn't like Hillary Rodham Clinton. She's a pox on the country. And he says, we love that technology expletive, March 2009, helps us spy on our citizens better. Now, most interesting, the punishment for the leakers and the New York Times who published the leaks, those people should be shot in the balls, says Snowden. He wondered how these anonymous sources could have disclosed such important classified information. So they have to be shot in the context of genital mutilation. And at least one observer has said, oh, well, you have to understand that's all part of his cover. That's part of his cover. He needed to do that because he was working already in 2009 towards what he's doing now. Well, how about if we go back to 2004 when he enlisted in the Army as a Special Forces recruit and wanted to go to Iraq because he wanted to kill people to free them from oppression. Would that have been part of his cover? And suppose he'd actually gotten to Iraq and he started killing people. Would we say, oh, well, it's true he committed this atrocity or that war crime or that Class A Nuremberg felony, but don't worry, that was just part of his cover. I'm afraid there are people that are just they want to believe, they want to be duped, they want the emotional satisfaction. And I would also say those people who naively promise that there's going to be some huge harvest of valuable leaks and that some people are going to have to be they're going to pay a terrible price when these leaks come out. Well, so far, nothing. And remember, that's the hallmark. So, and let's sum it up within the framework of our conceptual overview. Remember, I'm advancing 5 criteria. There's a very interesting article this week, well-done article with lots of citations. Unfortunately, he gets it wrong. He thinks I have 3 criteria. No. The criteria are 5, and here's what they are. The limited hangout leaker, the protagonist, right? The anti-hero or hero, is an immediate media celebrity. Ellsberg, Assange, Snowden, never fails. Immediate darling of the controlled corporate media. This says a lot. Secondly, the great secrets that are supposedly being dumped are nothing new. We know it all already. We know all about warrantless wiretapping, warranted wiretapping. We know about emails being read and all this other stuff, right? We've known this since the heady days of Bush and Cheney. We know all about it. Third, we don't learn anything, zero, nada, about the main covert operations of the age. The JFK assassination, the 9/11 attacks, the Arab Spring, other dirty operations, big things, nothing. Do we have any careers destroyed? Any spooks or politicians from the United States, Great Britain, Israel, NATO countries, France, any place like this? Zero. The only people that get hit by something like Assange are the CIA enemies list. So that's number 3. Number 4, and this is the one that comes into play right here, the Damascus Road conversion, the inexplicable shift of profile from warmonger to peace angel, from totalitarian to civil libertarian. That's what we see here with Snowden. And we'll be back in just a minute. Welcome back to World President Radio. So Snowden wanted the leakers to be shot. Capital execution with genital mutilation was his recipe for leakers. He found Ron Paul dreamy. He's a Paul Pard. Now, the 4th point, as I say, of my 5 criteria, and these are important because this is a system of proof, among other things, that the leaker becomes an immediate media celebrity darling of the left liberal-controlled corporate media. Number 2, that there's nothing new in this entire thing. And above all, number 3, there's nothing about the main covert operations of the age, JFK, 9/11, Arab Spring, and things of that general magnitude. Number 4 is the Damascus Road conversion. Most extreme in the case of Ellsberg. It's in 1969 that he's attending some kind of an anti-draft meeting at Haverford College. Why would he go there? He's so impressed by the draft resistor who's about to go to jail that he falls on the floor, he rolls on the floor, he has a nervous breakdown, he's born again, and he's born again then as a peace angel, and he can't be the warmonger, nuclear planner, Operation Phoenix butcher that he had been before. Okay, so that's what we have here. We have Snowden in 2004, he wants to join the Special Forces and kill. He says in 2009 that leakers should be shot and genitally mutilated. But then now today he's a peace angel and he's concerned about civil libertarians, right? Presumably it's the dreamy Ron Paul that presided over this. But this is absolute garbage. And I must say, since I am quoted by name, we have a piece on InfoWars by Watson from Britain, who says that there's no proof. He quotes my work at length for much of his article, and then much of his statement, and then he gets at the end to there's no proof, so therefore we've got to support Snowden anyway. He wants to support Snowden. I'm sorry. Those 5 criteria, the media darling, nothing new, nothing on the main covert operations, Damascus Road, and prepares future covert operations, that is a system of proof. And if we can demonstrate that typology from Ellsberg to Assange to, in this case, Snowden, I think that's conclusive. Remember, what's conclusive in these things is the pattern. The individual details are always open to being refuted. They're always subject to being garbled or misreported. But once the pattern emerges, it is the pattern that has the objective validity. And I'm afraid what Watson does in that InfoWars article is simply to say, well, we've got to support Snowden. I think his motivation is clear, because little Rand Paul has gone out on a limb for Snowden, so we don't want to embarrass our friend little Rand, right, presidential candidate and all that. And therefore, we will embrace basically saying, well, even though Snowden makes the Syrian war more likely, we'll still support him. No, I'm sorry. That is morally bankrupt. That is disgraceful. That is unacceptable. And we have, among the left liberals, examples of people who are determined to be duped. The other thing we find is Greenwald, right? Glenn Greenwald, our great hero. He's a supporter of the Iraq war. Not only does he express scorn and contempt for anything to do with 9/11 truth, he hides behind the well-known intelligence community blowback thesis, but Greenwald never objected to the Iraq war at all and did express his confidence in Bush. That's George W. Bush, Mad Dog Bush the Younger, in terms of our terminology here. Plus, we're hearing all sorts of other things about Greenwald, right? There's something that he invested in some rather risque operations. We'll leave this to the tabloids. But there you have it. The other thing about Snowden, this shadowy financial angel, Mr. Sigurvinsson, he has kept a private jet waiting for Snowden to take off and perhaps go to Iceland. This is very, very suspicious, right? Where do we get a super-duper millionaire like Sigurvinsson who can afford private jets? And it's a contrast. People who have slogged in the trenches of JFK or 9/11 or anything like that, you know that there's no private jet waiting for you. But apparently for the jet-set glitterati of the Assange and now Snowden set, it's possible. And let's even take this further. Let's look at the question of the investigative journalist Michael Hastings. Let's contrast, once again, the Ellsberg, Assange, Snowden treatment to the Gary Webb, Hatfield, and Hastings treatment. And you can see what it is right away. We are told that Hastings was preparing the biggest CIA expose of his entire career. There's one report that says that Hastings was working with Jill Kelly, right, the socialite who somehow, the Matahari, I guess, who rotated around the Tampa Central Command military base, involved with General Allen, involved with General Petraeus, and others with Broadwell. Jill Kelly there, that was apparently interviews going on between Hastings and Kelly, although some deny it. The wife denies it. The story is then that Hastings, in the last day or so of his life, was complaining that there was FBI harassment. There was a federal probe. He wanted to go into hiding. But one of his associates came on Fox News and announced that this was going to be the biggest CIA story yet. Remember, Gary Webb showed the prevalence of crack cocaine on the streets of Los Angeles, related that to the cocaine being brought in by Iran-Contra, Oliver North, others. This was a way to market that cocaine, and then died attributed to a suicide. Hatfield, of course, writing on George Bush right before the 2000 election, found that Bush the Younger had been guilty of narcotics violations and that to avoid jail, he had been given community service, and that came out, and this guy was found dead in a motel room. And now we have Hastings. In the case of Hastings, a Mercedes-Benz blows up, the engine flies out, and so forth, and we've got Richard Clark saying that this is coherent with a possible cybernetic interference with the car. I would recall the case of the Austrian right-wing populist politician Georg Haider, Haider, who was killed 5 or 6 years ago in a December crash of his Volkswagen Phaeton, quite a limousine that he had. And this was a very mysterious death, and there may be some connection. But in any case, this, I think, shows us the difference, right? As one very perceptive observer put it, there's a difference between people who pose a threat to the system, such as Gary Webb, Hatfield, Hastings, and those who pose as a threat to the system. The as says it all. Those who pose as a threat to the system, Ellsberg, Assange, and Snowden. So it's time to exercise healthy skepticism on those fronts. And you've also got essentially a deepening, a thickening of the cloud of disinformation going on with, as I said before, the various left liberal and the various libertarians coming forward to assert once again their own gullibility and their own indifference, really, to the Syrian war situation, which for us here is the main issue. So remember, the action points now are impeach Kerry. Impeach Skull and Bones Kerry, John Forbes Kerry, the degenerate blue blood who tried to start a war on the afternoon of June 12th. That's a very overt act. That cannot be tolerated. And then support the Answer Coalition demonstrations in this period of time, essentially this weekend, from about the 28th, I think, up to July 4th or something like that. Take a look at the Answer Coalition, but go as the United Front Against Austerity with our demands. Back in a minute. To our second hour of World Crisis Radio here on Friday, the 28th of June, Webster Tarpley in Washington, D.C. Now, the climate of intrigue and intelligence warfare here in Washington has become exacerbated even further. We have to go back now about, 13 months, right? At the time of the Bilderberg meeting in June of 2012, the New York Times columnist David Sanger published a series of revelations about Operation Olympic Games. Operation Olympic Games, the U.S. program to sabotage, slow, harass, shut down the Iranian nuclear development program, in particular nuclear enrichment. This, of course, is everybody's right under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, right? If you want to have nuclear reactors, you've got to do some enrichment. But the Stuxnet virus was revealed. Sanger revealed the fact that the Stuxnet virus, well, I guess at this point a lot of people had assumed that this is what it was something set up by the United States with the help of the Israelis and others to try to destroy some of the centrifuges that Iran was using to enrich uranium for peaceful purposes, according to the Iranian account. And there is no refutation of that anywhere that I've ever seen. But this was considered a big leak. Now, this was the point where many reactionary Republicans began screaming that the leaks had gone too far, the leaks had to stop. And this is sort of where the Obama countermeasures begin. In other words, the stuff with James Rosen, the stuff with Associated Press and others have to do with the attempt to try to find that leaker. So this has a history of at least a year or slightly more. Now we have the report coming from NBC News that federal investigators are targeting General James Cartwright. James E. Cartwright, retired four-star general of the Marine Corps, nicknamed Haas Cartwright. He was, for a time, the vice chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, meaning the number 2 uniformed military officer of the entire U.S. military establishment. He was, and this is, I think, important to bear in mind, although it's not exactly clear how it all fits together. In 2011, there was a surge of reporting that Cartwright was the favorite of Obama, that he was somehow Obama's favorite general, that he was temperamentally congenial to Obama, that he was cerebral, that he was professorial, that he was against the surge in Afghanistan in 2009. He was more on the Obama-Biden divine plan kind of approach, right? The drones and the assassinations rather than the heavy infantry divisions and big air campaigns. So this Haas Cartwright is now the target of a federal investigation. The story back in 2010, 2011 was that Obama liked him. Now, we have to look at all this now with another round of great skepticism, because whatever we thought we knew about this now would have to be subjected to new analysis. It's also pretty clear that to be Obama's favorite general also has a lot to do with the fact that you're not Petraeus. In other words, Obama was always looking, still is, I guess, looking for generals who don't like Petraeus, who don't want to be part of the Petraeus military clique. They don't want to be part of that McChrystal-Petraeus anti-Obama military clique, which so obvious is there, right? Remember, Hastings, the contribution of the late Hastings, is that he exposed McChrystal and his entourage, right, his staff, his court, I suppose we might say. That clique around McChrystal was motivated by extreme contempt for the elected leaders. In other words, he's insubordinate. He's talking about rejecting the traditional subordination of the military leaders to the elected civilian government established under the Constitution. So no more of that. Once McChrystal was exposed, right, that was the end of the line for him. And, of course, it also then impacted Petraeus. I would say Cartwright in 2010, 2011 probably looked good to Obama because he was not Petraeus. He might have been anti-Petraeus. And in terms of what he recommended back in that critical debate in 2009 about the surge, right, which in retrospect looks somewhat different than it did at the time, this Cartwright clashed with Mullen. Mullen wanted the big surge. Admiral Mullen, head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Cartwright apparently didn't. But now that Cartwright is out of the service and working as a consultant, the word is that he's a big critic of drone warfare. In other words, in 2009, his position seemed to be the divine plan, right? Let's go with drones and assassinations and cyber and sanctions, economic. Now, not so clear. But look, we got to cut through this somehow. What is the net effect of a top general, the former number 2 of the Pentagon, being indicted? Who does that help? I guess that helps the anti-putsch forces, or whatever Cartwright represented or didn't represent. 4-star general getting targeted by the FBI, that probably clears the mind of some of these people, right? Makes them ask again, is it really worth it to be part of the Petraeus faction? Is it really worth it to be so what can we say? So interested in new forms of political rule here in the United States. So it seems to me that my initial guess, and I stress this really is a guess at this point, is that the coming indictment of Cartwright, if that's what it is somehow an attempt to chasten, to deter, to warn, to chill the entire officer corps and essentially remind them to revert to the traditional roles and drop the rest. After, of course, that huge upheaval we had last autumn when we had Petraeus out, Allen out, Stavridis out, Goyette out, and so forth, right? The entire series of flag officers who were ousted always under the pretext of sexual peccadillos and or money peccadillos. Here's one which is no longer a sexual or money peccadillo. This is now Cartwright leaking. And again, there is a question of why, right? Why would he do this? What was the point of it? Not at all clear. But I think again, the net effect of somebody in the Pentagon being targeted by the FBI, this I think is going to cause these people to settle down. So we're going to be looking at that and continuing the analysis. But I would say that's probably the best guess we can make at the present time. Now, the Voting Rights Act, shifting gears now into domestic. The rats cabal at the Supreme Court has struck once again. And here's their pattern. They're willing to offer narrow, grudging concessions on these gay rights issues, right? Gay marriage, marriage equality, and so forth, which it seems to me this is a pretty much an open and shut case. Whatever you think of it, it's the equal protection of the laws. So it doesn't matter what you think of it. It doesn't matter what any state says in a referendum or anything like that. It's simply prima facie equal protection of the laws. So let's get that out of the way and then move on to other topics. But at the same time, this is balanced by attacks on voters, work.
Oh, sure.
Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Just to sum that up again, the pattern of the Supreme Court decisions this week, coming from the Bratz cabal dominating this stuff, very narrow, very grudging concessions on gay marriage, marriage equality, and so forth. But at the same time, a massive attack on voters, on workers, on blacks, other ethnic minorities. So it is a massive reactionary shift. And the numbers of people, I've never seen a figure how many gay couples are expected to emerge from this. Be interesting to know that. But certainly when you look at the voting rights question, the workers' rights, right, the ability of workers to sue or to seek legal remedies for harassment by supervisors, creating a climate of systematic hostility in the workforce, and so forth. And indeed, the obvious racist overtones of the overthrowing of the implementation part of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That is a very ominous thing. Now, remember, it fits into this analysis that I advanced last autumn, the permanent austerity dictatorship. What does it mean? If you can control the courts, right, with reactionary or indeed fascist judges in the federal appeals courts and the Supreme Court, and that seems to be momentarily at least the case, that's essentially means that you can rewrite the entire law, and that's what they've done, right? This is extreme judicial activism, right? It's judicial vandalism carried out by the rats cabal. If you can get a situation where the franchise, the right to vote, is strictly limited by voter ID, by other harassment methods, and so forth, and if you can essentially outlaw unions, if you can use the Taft-Hartley Act, as has been done now in Michigan and in Indiana just in the last cycle, and then you can control the elections through money and media control, you then have a permanent austerity dictatorship, maybe 20, 30, 40 years, in time enough for the United States to collapse and for other powers to seize the predominance in the world under auspices that would not be good. So I'm not interested in discriminating against anybody. Here's my proposal. The pre-clearance for laws that bear on the election process, I want pre-clearance for all jurisdictions, not just Mississippi, not just Alabama, not just some racist enclave in New York State or California, whatever it is. All jurisdictions must henceforth be subject to pre-clearance. And that is what we learn, if from no other source than from the Tea Party. Because when you have Tea Party fanatics, right, the kind of people like Governor Corbett of Pennsylvania or others, right, when you have Snyder, when you have Walker, when you have Mitch Daniels and so forth, wherever those people go, voting rights are in danger. So the pre-clearance has to come for all jurisdictions. Otherwise, as Ross Barnett said, a legislature can ram through laws much faster than courts can overturn them. And, you know, they can pass a law to steal the election this year. By the time the courts catch up with it, maybe it's 3 or 4 years later, and by that time the legislator can have a new way to steal the election written into the law. Similar to what we saw in Michigan, right, where Governor Snyder had his little Hitler law, his emergency manager law, that was overturned by a majority vote on a question on the Michigan ballot of November 2012. It was overturned, it was rejected, but within a couple of weeks, Snyder had a new and more virulent form of local dictatorship enacted, and you'll never catch up with him, right? He'll always be 1 to 2 steps ahead of you. So this is extremely ominous. The Voting Rights Act is the centerpiece of the entire thing. Naturally, we're happy to see federal benefits, economic rights extended to same-sex partners. That's elementary justice. Again, there's no argument about any of that. That's all the equal protection of the laws. But unfortunately, when you look at the media, right, the same Supreme Court that had trampled on equality by avoiding the Voting Rights Act, right, which is the result of 150 years of struggle, the next day they got to be friends of equality and champions of equality based on these other decisions. And I'm afraid that is not the right way to look at it, right? They're obviously covering themselves to some extent. Now, other notes for mobilization. The student loan interest rate is going to double now on the 1st of July. And all new federal Stafford loans will then go from 3.4% to 6.8%. That, I think, will raise a hue and cry. There are a lot of public discussions, right, events here by think tanks on C-SPAN, on the radio, and so forth. Generally speaking, a very corrupt, orchestrated tendency to not consider the Warren-Tierney bill. And we remain committed to passing the Warren-Tierney bill, right, the one that will lower the interest rates on Stafford loans to 0.75%. Yes, 0.75%. And the way that's possible without harming the deficit or harming the taxpayer or harming the public debt or taxation or anything like this, it is by making the Federal Reserve pay for that. The money comes from the Federal Reserve discount window, and that's the partial nationalization of the Federal Reserve. So around this July 1st deadline, which is now Monday, there will be increased interest, and I hope going through July into August as the back-to-school momentum then gathers, maybe we can get this back on the front page. We also have the question of the Farm Bill. The Farm Bill was a rotten piece of legislation. They wanted $20 billion of genocidal budget cuts, killer cuts at the expense of poor people, the hungry, the sick, the defenseless. That's the face of the modern Republican Party, to gouge $20 billion out of the SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Program, food stamps. This will simply kill a determinable number of people, right? Some calculation would yield the number of people who would succumb, right, who would not be able to find any alternative. And at the same time, it had things about the federal farm program. We're in favor of parity prices for the farmer and an extremely generous food stamp program for everybody who needs it. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio. Welcome back to World Crisis Radio. Concerning the possible point of reference for what happened to Hastings, the death of Jörg Haider, it's J-O-R-G, Georg, Jörg, close enough, Haider, Austrian politician, died on the 11th of October, 2008, so 5 years ago already. He was the governor of Carinthia. Carinthia is Klagenfurt, right? It's the lower right-hand corner, the southeast corner of Austria, right, close to Italy, Yugoslavia, and so forth. And this was somebody who had won a big election victory and was causing severe problems for the European Commission, and they don't like political debate, right? They're totalitarian, as we know. So I would recommend, if you can read German, Gerhard Wisniewski wrote a very, very interesting account of that, of the death of Haider. So the question of, what can we say, mysterious deaths that occur in connection with the vehicles, this is something that we need to be aware of, and that's by Wisniewski is an important source on that. Now, a couple of interesting points. Now we're getting into the sequester more and more, and the sequester it deserves our continuing attention, absolutely, because this is very, very much with us, and the effects are cumulative. We're told, for example, in the Department of the Interior, the Forest Service has lost 500 jobs for firefighters during in particular, the summer forest fire season. And we've had quite a number of forest fires, as people have seen, in a number of western and other states. 500 firefighters would have made a significant difference, but no, this lunatic budgetary theory of the Austrian school had to prevail. And other recent summaries point to the cumulative effect of Meals on Wheels, that Meals on Wheels for elderly people is going from 5 days a week to 4 days a week in a number of jurisdictions. NPR this morning had the story of a 98-year-old woman who needed Meals on Wheels, and she was put on a waiting list. Well, if you're 98 years old, you can't hope to stay on the waiting list too long, can you? So this is going on. Now, the other side of it, and we'll talk more about this later, but concerning Obamacare, right, there is this interesting column by Krugman where he says the Obamacare shock is that after all of this, really negative brainwashing propaganda coming from the reactionary Republicans, a number of people are going to be shocked by the benefits of Obamacare. And in particular, the most obvious is this, right? And there may be people in this audience who need to be aware of this. October 1st is the beginning of registration, and I guess January 1st is when you can begin to get the benefits under Obamacare. If you don't have medical insurance and you can't get it because of a pre-existing condition, you will be able, under numerous circumstances, to get such coverage starting, the registration on October 1st and then the care itself delivered as of January 1st. So if you had no hope, if you were too young for Medicare, not eligible for other things in different states and so forth, you want to look at this Obamacare very, very carefully, because the obvious benefit is that you can get some kind of treatment, whereas before you could get nothing. And I think this is what the reactionaries care about the most. The whole reactionary wing of the ruling class is hysterical about the idea that the American people might grasp this concept, right, which has been kicking around since Franklin D. Roosevelt's State of the Union address, January 1945. You have a right to medical care. Yes, you do. You have economic rights. Franklin D. Roosevelt laid them out in that speech. There were 7 or 8 of them. One of them is you have a right to health care. Ron Paul said you have no right to health care. I'm sorry, you do have a right to health care. Those are economic rights. Economic and social rights are equally important with the religious and political one. So we're told now that the Obama regime is mobilizing librarians at public libraries to point people with pre-existing conditions to go and start registering for this. And I think people should be aware of this, right? There are some people who are trying to hang on now, stay alive until January so that they can get some treatment in January that might keep them alive. And, of course, don't forget that in quite a number of states, like Maryland, for example, you can get care even now if your situation is dire enough. We've also got the interesting story, right? Here's a government program that you ought to look at, right? NASA, the glory days of NASA. I can remember in the summer of 1977 when Voyager was launched, right? The space probe Voyager launched to explore the outer reaches of the solar system and indeed to go into interstellar space, right? To go out of this sphere dominated by solar activity, which is where we are, and it goes out to Pluto and beyond. And that is where Voyager is now. I think the article said Voyager is now 135 astronomical units away from the sun, so 135 times the distance from Earth to Sun, and still going strong, still sending these reports. And they have found that the solar wind is attenuating, but it has not quit. But now you've got galactic influences, right? Interstellar influences coming from other points of the compass. So that is from 1977 till now. And I think that is, there's a model of the science drivers, right? And remember, the science drivers are minimum 3 and hopefully more. High energy physics, plasma physics, the exploration and colonization and industrial production in the solar system and beyond, as we now see, at least exploration beyond, and then the biomedical research, right? Those three, and then add more. Now, we do have these anniversaries, right? The Gettysburg and Vicksburg anniversaries. And I would just like to warn against the tendency which I see on the part of left liberal and other progressive opinion. Here's Harold Meyerson, Wednesday, June 26th, in the Washington Post. And, of course, he is a left liberal and often useful, frequently completely wrong. He points to the fact that the U.S. wages, real wages, nominal wages, and standard of living remain under pressure, that the United States has two distinct sectional labor systems, right? There's a northern one and a southern one, and the northern one was always based on free labor, at least after the decline of the indentured servant era, whereas the southern one has gone through different permutations, slavery, sharecropping, and now Walmart, right? Slavery, sharecropping, and Walmart. And Walmart means low wages, no unions. Low wages, and no unions. And this is obviously not viable, right? Such a model will succumb to China. China will eat you alive if you think that's a model. And we'll be back with more about this in just a second. Welcome to our final segment here on the June 28th edition of World Crisis Radio. So, Harold Meyerson, where to build a fence. The U.S. has two distinct sectional labor systems. The northern system, you have more rights and higher incomes, and it's true. And in Dixie, fewer rights and lower income. So Dixie goes from slavery to sharecropping to Walmart, always with low wages. During the New Deal, it was Southern senators and representatives who insisted on excluding farm and domestic workers, mainly black, from the minimum wage. Then later on, we had the Taft-Hartley monstrosity right after World War II. There's a new article by Rich Yeselson in the journal Democracy showing how the Taft-Hartley was used to prevent unionization, making it too expensive, and now we have right-to-work laws, and those have advanced in Michigan and in Indiana lately. So Walmart at one point was a discount chain in the Ozarks. Now it's the largest private sector employer with low wages and anti-union measures. You can go back and read the speeches by William McKinley. Just the fact that it's cheap doesn't tell the entire story. You've got to go or get under the system where you can have the highest standard of living, not the prices on individual items. And that is a protectionist, dirigist, and mercantilist model of the kind that I have been recommending. And it also points out in the Civil War, the British, the French, the Spanish supported the Confederacy as much as they dared. They depended on cotton from the southern states. Today, BMW, Nissan, Volkswagen, these are companies that respect unions in their home countries, Germany, Japan, whatever it is, but they expect to come to the United States and deal with union-busting states, scab states, right-to-work states. So where does that leave us? If you go to South Carolina, by the way, that is the most foreign-owned place I've ever seen in the United States. You look at the signs and everything else, and all the factories and anything of any size is owned by some foreign interest. So that's South Carolina, and that's really the tale. Meyerson is optimistic that the Latino population will grow enough in the southern states. He writes in the American Prospect, or others write in the American Prospect magazine, that you're headed towards a black-white Latino coalition in the southern states, Texas going purple, and so on. But in the meantime, it's an economic drag, because in the 21st century, only a high-wage economy can survive. Low-wage economy is doomed, because Vietnam, Thailand, China, India, they will undercut you There are even now the Chinese being undercut by India, who are being undercut by Thailand, and so it goes down the line. So here's the problem, though. Meyerson says build a fence, but build the fence from Norfolk to Dallas. And the answer to that is no. It is one country, and we're not giving up. This reminds me of the abolitionists, right? The let the erring sisters go argument. No, no, and no. It is one country. We're not going to allow it to be broken up, and we're certainly not going to capitulate to the reactionary oligarchy of these southern states who are always in league with the Wall Street financiers. That's the head of the faction, was always in Wall Street. So the solution proposed, obviously he's not serious, but you get the idea. The fence proposed by Meyerson is bankrupt. And that then leaves us with this glorious anniversary and not enough time to do much justice to it. But today's the 28th of June, 150 years ago. Fighting Joe Hooker, who had failed at Chancellorsville, couldn't even get all his men deployed, was replaced by the engineer George Meade at Frederick, Maryland. And Meade had stood out because at Fredericksburg, he was the only Union commander who made real breakthrough progress at Fredericksburg. If his attack had been properly supported, that whole Fredericksburg position might have been lost to Lee and the Confederacy. And then at Chancellorsville, when Hooker lost his nerve after being almost hit by a shell, Meade said, don't leave, stay, and counterattack. And that might have also changed the course of history. So Meade, even though he doesn't get the adulation of some other generals, deserves, I think, a significant credit. So then he takes over, and as a military engineer, he's thinking of the Pipe Creek line here in Maryland, but then he realizes that the Gettysburg Fishhook is admirable as a place of arms. But I think that what we'd have to say about the Army of the Potomac at Gettysburg is its superiority is that of a superior system. It's not based on a couple of exceptional individuals, limited though they were, like Lee or Jeb Stuart or something like this, but rather it's a system that has developed to the point where it begins to work. On the first day, there's complete chaos. Nobody expects a battle there. General Reynolds of the First Corps goes to the top of the Lutheran Theological Seminary and sees where the position is and orders then that the regroupment be made there, and then soon after is killed in the fighting. On the second day, down at Little Round Top, it's Gouverneur K. Warren who sees the Confederate attack coming, and he gets members of the Fifth Corps out of line and brings them up there, the brigades of Vincent and Weed and others, saves the day. On the third day, the cavalry battlefield, right, the young General Custer sees Jeb Stuart coming and launches an attack on him with, about 1/10 of the force that Jeb Stuart had, but the shock for the Confederates was something they couldn't get over. You can even make an argument, some have, that the Sickles Third Corps salient on the second day, even though the losses were big, that was actually useful, because if you had simply tried to defend the very low ridge down there a little bit north of Little Round Top, that would not have been enough. So you needed a forward position. That's a controversial argument, but I think an interesting one. And remember that on the 4th of July, right, Gettysburg 1, 2, 3 July, on the 4th of July, it's Vicksburg, the surrender of Pemberton's army to Grant and Sherman in Vicksburg. Grant had tried 7 times to take Vicksburg in 1862 into 63. Go look at Fletcher Pratt, Ordeal by Fire, A Short History of the Civil War. Not totally accurate on all points now with modern scholarship, but still, as a piece of writing, unforgettable, especially for young kids. 7 times against the city, and then this maneuver, right, of going down the Mississippi River, then going inland to Jackson, Mississippi, capturing that, turning west, fighting the Battle of Champions Hill, and then investing Vicksburg with a 2-month siege, which will then end finally on July 4th. As some have said, Julius Caesar could have done no better, and it's also strongly reminiscent of Frederick the Great. And it was that Vicksburg campaign that really completed the education of Sherman to the point where he could then do the Atlanta campaign and the other things that he did. So these things are worth remembering. Take a look at the various websites of the National Park Service and so forth. There's a whole other argument to be made about what the Park Service has done, tearing down the electric map, tearing down the visitor center, moving the cyclorama. We don't have time for this now, and it's not appropriate. But let me just then put myself, if Dante could do it, maybe it can be pardoned here. The Cacciaguida cantos in the middle part of the Paradise is basically his great-grandfather, I guess, or great-great-grandfather, who comes forward. And I have one, too. Joseph Henry Tarpley was a member of the 11th U.S. Regulars under Floyd Jones, the 2nd Brigade under Burbank, the 2nd Division under Ayres, in the 5th Corps of General Sykes with the Maltese Cross, fighting then at Plum Run, Bloody Run, Houck's Ridge, and the Valley of Death in the late afternoon of July 2nd, 1863. So that's my in memoriam for this anniversary, and invite everybody to ponder some of the lessons of these huge events of 150 years ago right now. See you next week.